doctor, and he's not really used to the Dr. Scott thing, I do have to yell it at the top of my voice because he has the coolest name ever. And next we have Byron Ballard.
That's a way cooler name than mine, I just want to point out.
Dr. Scott?
No, Byron
Yeah,
Ballard?
well, people say all the time, so why did you change your name to that? And I go, trust me, Byron Ballard's a name you change from, not to. So it's part of a kind of a Southern tradition, so I'll start with my name. My full name is Helen Byron Ballard, and I was named after my grandparents. And my grandmother was already using Helen, so they didn't want to do that weird Southern thing of Big Helen, Little Helen. So they called me after my grandfather's name, which is my middle name, Byron, which has gotten me in more trouble in my life than I think I could write a book about it. And I will give you one example, which is not at all spiritual. I went for a study abroad summer when I was 17, and because of my name, they housed me with boys. And I was like, all right, but then they caught me coming out of the boys' room, and then they were ready to send me home, and I was like, but look, it's my room assignment. And then I'm sure legal issues flashed before their eyes, so it was all okay. It was fine. So I am a multi-generational working class Appalachian woman, but I'm the first person in my family to graduate high school, but I also have a terminal degree in my field, which is theater. So I have a Master of Fine Arts degree. I will never be Dr. Ballard, sorry. I'm working on an MDiv though, so I have a master something else. I began life as a folkloric witch, a cultural witch, lowercase w, but I was fortunate to be unchurched. My family, a generation back, had a fight with the Methodist Church, and we were raised without no church, which was really good ultimately. Except that I find I can still quote the Nicene Creed pretty easily. So I was a witch, and had no religion, but I studied mythology in middle school and in high school. I took 4 years of Latin, and I used to know that particular branch of mythology pretty well. And it wasn't until I was in college, many moons ago, before many of you were born, that we used to meet in the student union, where there was always beer when I was 18, always beer.
You went to a very different campus.
Well, it was before it was illegal to drink beer at 18, so it was a long time ago. And a group of women met in an encounter group. Some of you will remember that concept. And we were getting mimeographed sheets out of California from Starhawk. And I became Wiccan. I found the religion of choice, which is Wiccan. And I've been Wiccan ever since. I'm a member, it's an offshoot of McFarlane Dianic, which means that the worshipers are all genders, but the divinities are only one. And we've been doing that a long time. I'm the founder of one of the founders of Mother Grove Goddess Temple in Asheville, North Carolina. And when people say to me, oh, you are so lucky to be in such a strong pagan community, I just want to share that anyone, if we can have a strong pagan community in Western North Carolina, anyone can. But we've built this community brick by brick for 25 years. And before we've started building with the bricks, we had to make the damn bricks. So you can do it wherever you are. You can have a strong pagan community. And that's all. Take it away.
And next we have Ed Hubbard.
So I always feel so odd when I get up into those type of things because I'm a Corellian Wiccan. I'm a paladin of my church and my faith, and I am known as Ed the Pagan. That's my legendary name. Look, if you Google it, I am the #1 answer when you see that. The name was given to me not because I decided I was going to do that and upsert the rights of all pagans. I got into mainstream media in the 90s when talk radio became big. And Rokon and Gary Meyer on the 50,000 watt blower of WS Radio, I would go on and support our rights. And they said one day, well, you're a regular guest, we got to call you something. And they got me on the air and they said, oh, this is Ed the Pagan. And it was like, okay, fine, that's what it is. And for the next 2 or 3 years, I'd call in at various times. So I went to Parliament World Religions. I came back. I went to a place called Crossroads. I love media. Understand, I've done radio. I do a lot of pagan media. I've interviewed more people. I went to a place called Crossroads with somebody by the name of Drema Baker, and I had Isaac and Rick Johnson, Isaac Bonowitz, and Oberon, they had a really like all-star cast for this particular festival, 2000 festival. And Drema came up and says, "We're going to introduce you Ed the Pagan." I'm like, "Oh my God, you're doing this in front of all these people. They're going to know I'm Pretender." I walked on there and not anyone rejected it. And it was told to me because I was going to be the pagan that most people were going to be. And I might be the only pagan they would ever know about. And that became the way I live my life. And so that's why I'm here, I guess, more or less, because I've been doing that ever since.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions so far? Dead silence. Okay. Again, I've not done this before, and I did not prepare a line of questions. So I've been busy.
Think fast.
I'm right. So it's called Pagan Pathways for a reason, because I wanted to create some sort of diversity, because we all follow different paths, not necessarily pagan and or pagan. Pardon me. Great distraction right there. It's another dog I want to play. All right. Hi. All right. So why don't you start, Dr. Scott? Why don't you start with how you maybe found your path?
Yeah, well, so, you know, I guess I have two answers to that question. The first is that I didn't, because my parents were priest and priestess, I guess, of a covenant in St. Louis, and so I always grew up in that tradition. And to me, that has always been, you know, sort of the rock of my particular practice. Is that family coven, and even though haven't lived in St. Louis in many years, still I've never really gone out in search of another coven in the places that I have lived. I've lived in Kansas City. I currently live in Columbia, Missouri. I've never looked for a different group because it felt very strange to me, because it literally, like, we're talking about my parents and then the people who I grew up around, who were more of a family who you know had more of a that kind of deep family connection than my blood relatives did, for the most part. On the other hand, though, I've also been practicing heathenry since I was probably in my early 20s, I want to say, and that actually was because at Heartland one year, Alaric Albertson, who is an old family friend of ours, before he was famous, he was one of ours. And there was a Sather ritual, which is this, if you don't know about Sather, is this heathen kind of oracular magic where an oracle lets herself be possessed or speak with the voice of the dead or of gods or spirits or so on. And I went through that, and it was just such a powerful experience for me that I wanted to do more with that. And so I've been practicing both of those side by side for, I guess, about a decade. Which is sometimes I've gotten into, internet slap fights over, because I think that one thing that sometimes seems to come up is the idea that when we talk about pagan traditions or we talking about pagan pathways, that is an exclusive arrangement, that like you are a Gardnerian Wiccan of this specific lineage, and if you do anything else, then you are betraying, your core principles. And yes, I mean, there are a lot of accusations of pagan heresy, I think, that go into that. I've been writing at something I forgot to mention. Probably the thing that has brought me into the most contact with the broader pagan community is I've been a columnist at The Wild Hunt for about 6 years now, and before that I wrote at Pathos, and I wrote a series of columns about this, my discovery of heathenry and how I had come into that. And I just remember getting comments on those columns saying like, you're not allowed to do that. Don't call yourself a heathen. Like, that's fine. We're great that you think that this is cool, but you can't be both. And I wholeheartedly reject that idea. So, all right, that's...
Go ahead.
All right, I don't know.
What heretical idea. Can we talk about the Pelagian heresies? I love that one. Well, I told you all how I got to be Wiccan. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about my practice, my magical practice, which is Appalachian folk magic. And I have been practicing that since before I knew that was the thing I was practicing. And it wasn't just what the grandmas did. So I've been doing that a long, long time. And I was invited in 2008 to a conference at Harvard called Forging Folklore. And I presented a paper then called Hill Folks Hoodoo and the Question of Cultural Strip Mining. Because something that hits my region very hard is the notion of extraction. So people come in and they take out what they need and they leave the culture lessened and they don't add anything back in. So that happened with timber, coal, now we're doing fracking. But it also happens culturally. So people hate that whangy bluegrass music, they hate that old-timey music, but by God, they love Mumford and Sons. So once you pull it out of the culture, and you homogenize it and take the mountain edge off of it, then it becomes acceptable. So I've always been, like I said, I'm from a working class family and my attitude is working class all the way. So when people start taking stuff from me, it doesn't make me happy. In fact, it does the opposite of that, it pisses me off. So I did not want to share any of this knowledge about this amazing folkloric witch practice with anybody outside the region because I just assumed they would steal it and make it their own. As a matter of fact, they have, but here's the thing, I don't own Appalachian folk magic and nobody does. So if you've got somebody saying, well, I'm the be-all and end-all, but they're obviously somebody from California that has never actually known an Appalachian person, I believe those are on video, then I would ask you to maybe dig a little deeper and figure out what it is in the culture that appeals to you and not just a very successful form of magic. It is folk magic. It's a very successful folk magic that comes out of a Protestant tradition. So if people are teaching you, talking to you about traditional Appalachian magic and they start talking about saints or the Loa, then they are not doing traditional Appalachian magic because it's Protestant based. And I remember when I was first talking about it and people said, oh, well, what's your Wiccan tradition? Like the only kind of magic there could be was Wiccan magic. And several years ago, Brandy Williams asked me to be part of an anthology, Women's Voices in Magic. And I told her I'd like to do something on folk magic, and her response was, oh, we would love something on low magic. And my response to her was, oh, you mean the sorts of magic that actually work magic? And I saw her at PantheaCon a couple of years ago, and I told her that story, and she said, oh my God, I did not say that to you. And I said, oh yeah, you said that. So I practice low magic, field magic, MacGyver magic. But I am not afraid for a second to pull in the wrath of the Morrigan, or a Nana, or even Bridget, whose wrath is a little tinny. If you hurt me or mine, I'm not afraid of that in the least. Over to you, Anthony.
Go ahead.
So absolutely. So I'm a rebel of this. So my magical practices you can go find online, literally online. Go to witchschool.com. All of everything you need to learn, free of charge. Go there. What I really do in the community is a little different. I didn't like being clergy. I am not a good ritualist. I'm an excellent magician. I'm a terrible ritualist, especially for crowds. That was just one of the strengths. And then, so I was pursuing the love of being a priest of my tradition, but I didn't want to go out and do groups and things like that. I wanted to help everybody else. So since then, I build platforms for pagans. So I built radio shows. I was one of the first people to do radio. Because I believed if I could be, because I'm a convert, so I'm the worst kind of Wiccan, and all the rest of the people, you know.
I mean, that's most of them, right?
Right, so I became a convert at 28. But my pastor set me up years before that. So my pastor just happens to be the great Reverend Bakke, Ray Bakke. And if you don't know who he is, he runs something called the Lusitana Organization, which marked as one of the great evangelists of the major cities of the world. He sets up missions all over, and I would happen to be in his first church. And I sat every year from the time I was 8 to the time I left the church at 14, and every Halloween he went after witches. My favorite sermon every year, he would go, the witches are coming to take us over, and he'd list their crimes. They're trying to get us to teach evolution in school. I'm a scientist, I like evolution. That they were going to sell Ouija boards as toys, to send demons into the houses of young girls and boys. Well, we did that. And then he started laying out how witches were going to expand. They're going to get out flyers. They're going to get literatures. They're going to set up groups. Okay? So I met my first witch at 14. And I decided I was going to be God's spy for my church. I had to know everything about it. I walked into the occult store. Literally, that's the name of it. It's the oldest occult store in the country. And they looked at me and says, "Young man, can I help you?" He says, "I want to find out about witchcraft." He says, "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." And before I knew it, I had fallen into the witchcraft movement. I thought I was a spy. So my first high priestess, Donna Cole, great high priestess and beloved and missed, she came to look at me and she says, 15 years old, "So you want to be a witch?" She goes, I go, "Yes, I want to be a witch." She goes, "Okay." And she looked at me and says, "Well, you got to wait for 3 years and you have to give up your Christianity." And he goes, "What do you mean by that?" He says, "Oh, you just can't think your way is the only way and that we're wrong. When you're ready to look at us as people, come back." 3 years later, I showed up at their doorstep. I wanted to learn as much as I could because I had gotten past that point. I shedded my evangelical addiction to the apocalypse. From that day on, this is why I became the pagan. So my biggest practice is that forever. And from there, I began building platforms, and today, and I'm actually out talking about the next platform we're going to get, and just getting us ready to have resources. My big path is to get resources into the pagan community so that we can have the type of life to build the cultural tools that we need. And that's my life's path here.
Awesome. Anybody, any questions? Okay, coming up with another one.
So if I can,
Okay.
if I can
Oh, yes, go.
Yeah.
So what you were talking about at the start of your question, or the start of your answer, I guess.
They're always questions.
About feeling like that you weren't necessarily the best group ritual
Right.
I mean I really feel the same way
Right.
about that, and it's always one thing that has when it comes to participating in broader pagan outreach, I've never felt I do okay with my own magical practice. I feel great feel good about my connection or my relationship with the religion and with gods and whatever. But it's not like I feel like I have any that I have any particular interest in or anything special that I want to, in that sense, go out and be some sort of magical teacher on. I don't think whatever you need for that, I don't think I have it.
Right.
But it's a similar kind of thing of as you're talking about building platforms, a lot of what I've thought of as my work is sort of documenting in the same way that you have southern these Southern Gothic literatures that are describing sort of what it is to live in that mindset, live in that pathway. It's what I've tried to do with my writing is to give that kind of broad documentation of what pagan living sort of means. And I feel like that is a step that we as a movement are still preparing ourselves for, is that idea of what does it mean to have an important pagan voice, having important pagan voices that aren't strictly here's how to do magical practice kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the outreach that you're doing, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate though, since I'm not a good ritualist and I build platforms, I get some of the best ritualists in the world to do the rituals that I want.
On your platform.
On my platform. I build it all the time. Don's one of them. Yeah, there you go. Liz is another. But I don't want to do that. I've gotten fortunate. I've trained a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people. So when we need rituals, I got people to tap into. And that's really what the idea of it is being cooperative, because like what you're talking about, the pilgrimage, I want to talk about how can we take that to maybe something. See, this is the way I think. Say, I can rent a bus and we can put people in there, and that's a platform right there for me. So this is the way I think. How do we get you out there, put you in a bus, put you full of a bunch of people, talk about pilgrimages, take you around to them, that sort of thing. I'm all about getting our life out there. We deserve it. We're legendary. And right now, we are legendary people.
And we're needed. Pagan thought is needed in the world right now. Deep pagan thought. I do or I used to do, I'm on sabbatical right now, I used to do a lot of interfaith work. I worked with the United Religions Initiative, and we've had interfaith groups in Asheville for a long time. And I'm there not to talk about the commonality. I don't want to be there on December the 20th. Somebody talks about Hanukkah, and somebody talks about the solstice, somebody talks about Christmas, somebody talks about Ramadan. I want to get in to a place where we are sitting around a table and we start talking about the stuff we don't have in common. Because it's easy enough to go, oh, those nice pagan people, look, they wear tie-dye, isn't that sweet? And sometimes they're naked in the woods. Oh, that's adorable. Because all of that makes us feel very sort of precious and weirdly wonderful. Like we're like the Disney version of a religion. But when it comes down to cases is when you say things like, I'm going to talk about the difference between having a multiplicity of deity forms and you. Let's talk about that. Because that'll raise some happiness. Because they don't want to talk about, well, what do you mean? No, I mean, it's all just facets of one. It's just a oneness. It's just a. And then I like to say, so you're a monotheist, are you? So you got Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Okay, I get the triple aspect thing. But you've also got Satan, who is challenging your main God all the time. Doesn't that make him at least a demigod? Well, but no, because, but. So I want to talk about the hard stuff. I want to talk about the things like we have lovely people doing greening and stewardship and all that stuff that's terribly important. That Christians can kind of touch what it means to be really part of the earth because they now recycle things. Yay, big institutional churches recycle things. Whoop-de-doo. What I want to talk about is when I have to look out on a polluted lake, and it is not just that, oh no, the thing I'm supposed to be stewardship over, I'm not doing a good job. And I say to them, this is like you are giving feces to Jesus to eat. This is what you're doing to us. And that really is not a happy thought for them. They really don't like that. And it's like you're cutting off pieces of his limbs and you're maybe gilding them and hanging them in your house. How's that feel? Well, they don't like the way that feels. So I really want to challenge the religions around me to understand that I am just not a toy. I'm just not there to explain in a happy way and to say blessed be so they can all greet me with blessed be, Byron, I said the right thing. I want to get into it because what we have to say collectively is so important to the future of both the cultures, of the species, and of the planet. And we need to be doing that. If you can stomach it, I want you to do interfaith work and not just say, oh, everyone has a golden rule. Everyone doesn't.
Well said.
Cosign. Second the motion.
So, okay, let's talk about differences. Should we start with you? I'm gonna Dr. Scott. I'm going to always start with you because I can say Dr. Scott. Rookie, Janet. Okay, good.
No, I mean that whole talk there reminds me of there was this article that that the sadly largely lost from the internet Jason Pitzelwaters wrote this brilliant essay a couple of years ago talking about so there's the Charge of the Goddess, which most people, if you're familiar with Wicca, you're probably familiar with that. It's very sweet, very lovely. You'll gather the full moon, you won't be clothed, whatever. But there's the part before that gets quoted somewhat less. This is the very beginning of Aradia, when essentially Diana is describing what's Aradia's job as a witch. What is a witch? What does a witch do? And the thing she says is witches poison rich people. Like witches the rich and the powerful, the people who enslave others. Like your job, like what witches do is they poison them, and they cast them down. I've thought about that passage a lot in thinking about sort of, this goes into, I think, what what you're talking about with the stewardship, with the stewardship of this polluted lake, this kind of thing. That like, if we are, on the one hand, it's really important that our magical practices, honor and understand that connection to the earth. But then that also, like the most potent kind of magic that we have available to us is also to like actually go out and go after and try to fix some of these situations. And like that is, for me, that's been a big part of my kind of practice and my life way in the past, certainly in the past few years. As I've been more involved, my day job is I'm a labor organizer, and I see. I just started last Monday, so.
Go you.
Thank you. And I see that as being part of, like, I see that as going along with that passage from Aradia. Like, I'm not literally poisoning anyone, obviously, because you're videotaping. But no, I kid.
Tell me behind the fan.
But it is the same sort of thing that, like, to my mind, like what paganism is ultimately is paganism is a rejection of the world of power and power over.
Yes.
And that the best thing that we can be doing as the thing that I see myself as doing as part of my religious practice is doing my best to reduce that sense of domination that it haunts us throughout most of our daily lives.
Yes.
Anyway, all right, that's my spiel there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
So, for me, for transparency, I work with Parliament of World Religions. I've attended every parliament there's been, and I'm planning to do really well with the next one, working in the interfaith. And for me, the number one difference that we have to deal with is a very simple one: soul ownership. Let's get it into brass tacks. Most religions say your soul is already owned. You just got a mortgage on it, and your mortgage is going to tell you where you're going to live at the end of that period of time. Right? It's a soul ownership, and you're paying off your mortgage to return to your proper place in the world. If you're a reincarnationist, which is the most provable afterlife subject, combined with the recent research that found out that family ancestral memories have been passed down through DNA, and that if you believe in evolution, knowing that the first amoeba, when it's split, is still splitting inside of us, and that we're going to be reincarnated either through our memories of DNA or through other methods, that's a really big subject. And they burned us at the stake before, because then you cannot build a mortgage on something you already own. Pagans own their own souls, and everybody else believes they have a mortgage on theirs. That's the number one difference between us and almost every other religion.
And because so many of us have come out of other religions, we're a convert religion in so many ways. I mean, my daughter, like you, is a cradle Wiccan. So she is always
Cradle
doing-
Wiccan.
Oh yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a nice. I like that
That's way nicer
term.
than second generation. Like that's.
Yeah, I know.
That's-
Star Trek thing.
Well.
That is Star Trek.
It is kind of a Star Trek thing about that. Now I don't even know what I was talking about. So,
But then we're a convert.
yeah, we're a convert religion, and because of that, there is still a lot of jockeying for position among people. And I always say, if you can dig into the biosphere, and those of you who have attended my classes here, it's like be on the land that you love. And sometimes the land you love is inner city Chicago. But it's still on the land. Just because the land is covered with concrete doesn't mean the land is not there. And it's important that we be in relationship. But the other thing about being a religion of converts is that often I know more about Christianity than Christians I'm talking to. So that when we talk about this, part of my practice is very Irish, and we talk about the Pelagian heresy. Well, they don't know what that means. Well, I won't tell you all, I'll make you look that up. But for me to know about that means that one of the people who trained me was in fact an Episcopal priest, who trained me how to be a priest in a religion, not a pagan priest, But this is how you tend a flock. This is how you tend a house of worship. This is how you tend to the place where the divine lives. And for us, the divine lives everywhere. It lives in us, it lives here, it's all around. So it's not up there. And it's an important thing for us to acknowledge for ourselves, as important as the notion that we own our own souls, is that this is all part and parcel of who and what we are. And I was at an interfaith gathering about environmental issues, and this very, very liberal Presbyterian said, oh, but you know, the original language of Genesis does not say to dominate. It says we are to be good stewards. And I've got a rabbi on this side who goes, you know what? You don't read Hebrew. The original language of Genesis is that uses the same word that you use for making kraut. That you are to take nature and you have to press down on it until you get from it what you need. So this guy is all, oh, it's all good, it's all fun. And the Jewish guy said, no, we can't just rethink the language of Genesis. We have to take Genesis as a story and not as a law. Thank you.
Oh, come on, ask some questions. Come on. Okay. So, great. That's differences. Great. Yay. Good job. I know.
You're doing fantastic.
You're doing great. Yay, Jackie.
Go, Jackie.
I prepared so hard for this.
May I tell you a story about my daughter?
Please do that.
And converts. She will never see this, so it's fine. So my daughter, the cradle Wiccan, the second generation Wiccan, we were part of this big, like there was a big family coven. It was 5 families. We met every Saturday night for 10 years. So these kids were totally pagan kids. She gets to college. And of course, everybody at 18 wants to become a pagan and hasn't been because they've been a Presbyterian. They get to college and they go, oh my God, I am totally a pagan now. And there are pagan student unions. So my daughter goes, oh, I'm going to go to the pagan student union. That'll be cool. Nobody would listen to her. And she's a Taurus, so she was like, I know how to do this. Don't you understand? I've been doing this for years. No, we can't hear you. So my daughter, the Wiccan child, joined Hillel.
Oh.
And she did that because the boys were cuter than pagan boys, and the food was better. So she did Hillel for a while because the pagans were not tolerant of her.
I believe we have bigger differences in our community. As an example of that, I'm doing something, so I love technology. I believe technology is magic. If magic is the act of manifesting our will to make a change in our environment, technology is one of the tools we change our environment with. Everything begins as magical or personal subjective. Imaginary subjective, the dream of a DNA, the first thought of getting a lamb. I need to go faster, so I want something faster than a horse. So it all begins with these personal experiences. Tesla was famous for this. He had all these personal experiences that ended up being scientifically objective realities. But they started out as personal, subjective experiences. So we're going to do something called the Global Wicca Summit online. A week of it. We're going to use radio, we're going to use podcasting, we're going to use Facebook, we're going to use a lot of different things. And the reason why it's the Global Wicca Summit is heading into an interfaith conference is because there's so much difference between what now appears to be a growing rift between Wiccans and the vast majority of pagans. Fluffy bunnies, Wiccans are always dominating. And that as Wiccans, we're getting ready to get all the voice of the Wiccans to find out where our mutual sames and differences are so that we can present ourselves to the Parliament of World Religions as an intact religion. Because right now, Wicca is seen as the force in the Parliament of the World Religions as the new religious order of the much more proper indigenous religious groups of Europe and the Mediterranean, which is the official language of the Parliament for paganism. So that sort of energy has now created neo-paganism, new religious movement, and it's a way for some of the academics and the globals to begin dividing us, to break us up. Remember, always, what do they want to do? They want to break these groups up. And one of the big breakups now is to try to get the Druids to say, we're only Druids, heathens, we're only heathens. And they saw that with the fight for the Pentacle. The Pentacle, as the military, is Wiccan. The Astrotrue had to get their symbol. So they're trying. So the forces out there It's a term from Heartland Pagan Association to say, well, it's really Heartland Druid Association or Heartland Wiccan Association. And this is our own community doing this to us. And so we're doing this summit to kind of get our Wiccan voice together, because it's the only thing we're allowed to represent is our own groups and people who share our own voice. And I do believe each group has, like Pagan's Tonight Radio, we let everybody have their own voice. But these differences are about to put a wedge between almost every other pagan group and Wiccans. This is the number one thing facing our community, dividing those two pieces into two separate identities. And that's from both inside, from the Wiccan side and that. And you know what the number one cause of it is? I can tell you the word. Fluffy bunny. It's a curse, it's a slur, it's a slander. McWiccans, Llewellyn witches, fluffy bunny, which means every Wiccan is discredited because that's the rule. I'm a real pagan, I'm not a Wiccan. That is a bigger challenge than anything the Christians are doing, the Muslims are doing, or anything. That fight to me is the number one fight we have in our community, and it's really beginning to grow.
We're actually seeing a lot of that now. I'm from Southern California. That's where I was raised up in my coven, where I raised up my coven, and then I met my coven here too. But it's shocking to me to get into like all my Kansas City pagan groups and see just the absolute dissing of Wiccans as fluff bunnies. I'm like, well, I remember 20, 25 years ago when the Wiccans were like pointing at the New Agers, going, "Oh, you're all the fluff bunnies," and we're like the hardcore Wiccan, actual have a religion and a magical practice and like a set of things that we do, although they're very across tradition, there's still a set thing. So it's interesting how it's come kind of full circle, where now the general pagan community as a whole is going, "Oh, you Wiccans, you fluff bunnies," because we're eclectic or we're whatever. And as a visual priest myself, I'm very interested in that divisiveness, because I feel like, like you said, divided we fall. We don't figure out how to coalesce the community and still maintain the diversity of the community. We're all lost. So,
And it's almost a perfect 50-50 cleave.
yeah, absolutely.
I think we have to bear in mind also what you just said, that part of this began with our own bad behavior.
Yes.
And we must stop that. We have a huge rift between the eclectic Wiccan community and what we might call the British Wiccan community. I don't know that there is a term that they would all agree on, but we know who we mean. And we need to stop that before it carries us far farther and gives more fuel to those who want to get rid of us altogether. So I think it's really important that we make sure that we do not do the very thing we're not wanting to happen.
We need to not become the monsters that we're trying to fight.
But in some cases, we need to stop being the monsters we have been. Because the Wiccan identity war has shattered. It basically shattered the movement. Because before that, we were a far stronger movement. And we think all of it.
It was all about dividing and conquer, and the witchier than thou attitude.
It was incredibly destructive.
Well, and I think those witch wars in the 90s were all over the place. Because we saw them even in little old Asheville, and we called together a council of Vardos. And it was like seating people for dinner at the Capulets and the Montague Wedding. Because this person couldn't sit by this person, and that person couldn't be across the circle from another. Because then it was really, really hard. And we ended up in our community coming to an agreement that we could not worship together, but we could meet together to do social activism. And that way we stepped back from sort of that homogenization effort that a lot of people were doing. But those were hard times. The 90s were very hard times.
I think it's just because, when the East here in America really started coming to its own in the 90s, and we were trying to figure out, and yes, we had a lot of things. I'm not saying we didn't have a the 90s before the 90s, but I feel like the 90s were really the decade where you had a lot of new groups coming into Wicca and paganism in general. People like me, Gen Xers, going, "Oh, what is this new thing? Oh, wait, this is going to be my past. I'm the rest of my life because it resonates with me so well." And so
And that's something that Parliament does, and also the United Religions Initiative. It's not about making everybody vanilla. It's about you standing firmly and beautifully on your spiritual tradition and saying, this is what we do. These are the foods we eat. This is what we celebrate. These are our divinities. And we also need to do that culturally, so that we're not judging each other. Because, in the 80s it was like, worship whatever you want to. And then the 90s happened, and it was like, you're doing that wrong. And in lineage traditions, someone in your lineage can say to you, that is not how we do this in this lineage. But so few people are in lineage traditions anymore, that almost doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it's a huge change. I come from a lineage tradition, and I was raised up in the early 90s. You have to do it this way. And I'm like, well, I left church so I didn't have to do it this way. So I was always pushing the boundaries, but still trying to respect my elders. And eventually went into the priesthood myself. So, yeah, it's like, how do you find that balance? You have to find that balance. And we have, I believe very firmly that we have to honor the traditions of where we came from. British traditionalism, American Wiccan, whatever it is, all those roots that brought us to where we are today, and still recognize that it's time to move forward. And it's interesting that you say, we didn't have this problem in the 80s, and then all of a sudden in the 90s, this thing happened. And I'm a witch, I'm a Wiccan that came up in the early 90s, so that molded me as
We hit critical
for a long
mass.
time.
On some level, we hit critical mass.
Yeah.
So let me offer a future for you. Yeah, tomorrow, and in my class tomorrow, Pagan's Future Dance, I'm going to offer a lot of what I think is going to be conditioned. Let me offer you the next witch wars. They're brewing hard right now. We're talking about the divide between pagans, but us as Wiccans are about to be faced with our greatest challenge. What is the hashtag for the third largest political movement in the United States? Hashtag witches. Political activism of witches. Young women are coming out and calling themselves. Lacey May did the witch poem. 2 million views within 48 hours. Ripped right through the pagan community. She's going to TEDx based on her poem that we won't come quietly. Aha. Let us talk about that subject. Major poem. Boom. She is not a Wiccan. She's not a pagan. She's politically identifying. Binding of Trump. The binding of people. Right? These moments. I am going to be an independent woman, which is now amongst the Zers and the late millennials, which means woman self-empowered. And they're going back to the original Dianic information, just like Z Budapest, just like all of those did. And they're now rebuilding their own movement separate of us based on this political activism. And they're going to reach critical mass with their leaders in the next 36 months. For the 2020 elections. Okay? They are.
No, it's happening.
Yeah, it is happening. I'm telling you, these are the big hashtags. That hashtag runs over 3 million hashtag elections a day. Me Too and Black Lives Matter are the only two that do them. I'm telling you.
And you'll find sometimes the three of them together.
Okay.
That's how cohesive they are.
So how are we going to feel as Wiccans? We talk about being the monster. You're right. How are we going to feel when all of a sudden we have all of these witches? I'm a witch. What does that mean? I'm a self-empowered woman.
Well, it feels very familiar to the second wave feminists.
Right.
Who's been using the word witch, I guess, since 1971. So it doesn't feel at all othering or uncomfortable. It's like sisters and brothers come on in. Because there's also the divide, and it's not a huge one, between people like me who practice a folkloric witch tradition and people who practice witchcraft as a spirituality. And that's a different thing. Now, I happen to be a lowercase witch and an uppercase witch. So I do both of those things. But I had a shiny young Gardnerian priestess say to me once I could not use the word witch because I wasn't a Gardnerian. And my response was, well, my great-grandmother, who was born in 1864, called herself a witch before Gardner was born. So how do you explain that to me? Well, she couldn't explain that to me because she could only explain out of her lineage tradition how that word was not for me. That word has always been for the other. And it's been for people who have been unafraid to wield the powers of the universe, however that comes about. And that's what a witch is. A witch is, and when we were first using it, is a woman who has the powers of the universe at her fingertips and cannot be controlled. Now, what isn't beautiful about that? And when I talk about discuss Magick behavior, I talk about it in terms of kick it down, burn it up, and dance on the ashes. Because that's the world I see coming. And I see it full of beautiful, naked, dancing people who call themselves witches, don't. But it becomes this aligned political movement that is going to change things. We are going to break these systems down one way or the other. Patriarchy can come easy if it wants to, but it never has.
Awesome. That
Oh my.
I can't follow you. So the as the Speakers Command chairperson, I hired this woman.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The reason why I hired Dr. Scott is not because he has the coolest name in the entire universe, but because he has a knowledge base in the pagan pathways. He's also a friend of my friend. And had a lot to talk about getting stoned, about being second generation, and stuff like that. The reason why I hired Byron is because I was really fascinated by what she had to offer, and that's the Hill Folks Hoodoo stuff. And because that's not something I'd ever heard of before, and I was fascinated with it. Not to steal it, but because I wanted to learn.
Buy a book. Read it all.
Absolutely.
I have them right down there.
And the reason why I hired Ed the Pagan is because he's awesome. Because of his technical knowledge and his wisdom. And because you're Ed the Pagan, you should say really nice stuff about him. And because he's very big in the pagan community as far as technology-wise and stuff like that. So, are there any other questions? This only lasted an hour. I was fully prepared for it to last 2, but it's hot.
Yeah, it is.
What kind of platforms do you feel like? Are you doing like internet platforms?
I've done every internet platform there. I've gone from one list, e-groups, to Yahoo, I have Ning sites. We do podcasting 7 days a week called Pagan Tonight Radio. We have Magick TV, which we're doing filming for right now.
Don't worry, your faces aren't in it.
Able to go out there. One of the things we believe, I use YouTube. We were one of the first in YouTube. The next big change, we're going to be I'm talking about cyber spirits tomorrow. I want to be in the next one where we have our own ghost in the system because we're all going to voice. Alexa is a spirit, programmable. We better program them ourselves. So we use every platform I believe in. So I'm platform agnostic. I'm a day trader of attention, seen online from Gary Vee. So my whole job is to look at the pagan community and find out where their attention is and try to keep them focused on building their next resource. So right now I'm doing a lot of Facebook Live. Facebook Live, YouTube, podcasting. I'm thinking about starting a 24-hour station on Live 365 probably by the end of the year. So that's a possibility.
So like you know how to do you work on getting people involved as well, or is it more like kind of watching?
So what I do is I support others. Being a paladin, I basically support others. So I'm not necessary to get my message. So I do my own radio show, but instead of me going on 5 nights a week and doing the Ed the Pagan show, which I could have done, I went out and got 5 other people. So on Pagan Tonight we have an Oscar teacher. We have Cillian Fox talks every Tuesday teaching her Circle Sanctuary class, getting her voice out there. I don't like my singular voice.
Yeah.
I'm kind of boring sometimes. I love a pagan chorus. So every piece of technology I do is about creating a pagan chorus. Because only when our voices put together sound good.
I totally agree.
Yeah. And so if you want to, and if you want to make money on it, I also help people monetize their attention, because I believe in that. If you want to set up a new network, there's things out there. So I depends on your thing, but I really almost, actually the Parliament just wrote me about doing crowd rise. I have to do that. So I believe in all of it. So last time, and I just kind of really like to hear this because I really think that basically technology is a magical force, cyber force, and everything I build is for other people to use. Because love that. But I do think of the magical force. So if you really want to say anything, talk to me. If you get your message out there. It's a really hard thing to do, and I'm not going to kid you. But we're just going to keep going. I hope that answered it.
Yeah.
And the answer to the question, I think that happened in the 90s, I think if you look at the authors, right? You've done a lot of stuff. So did the authors, Simon, didn't Llewellyn rise at the same time that everything else was growing? Wasn't the rise of Llewellyn books suddenly in the marketplace in the 90s?
Oh, I mean, everything here is coming out, like that whole skyrocket in the 90s comes off of the late 80s. And, you know, Scott Cunningham blowing up the market. You know, that's the thing that causes the, if we want to call it, you know, the big divide. Is that previously there was this initiatory, like path-based kind of religion, and then suddenly that's not really what it was anymore. There are, you know, one issue perhaps is trying to keep, you know, these initiatory path-based Wiccas in the same category as the you know, solitary self-initiated book Wicca, and you know, I think that it's absolutely unfair and gatekeeping to try and denigrate that you know, that more solitary self-initiated book Wicca practice, and trying to claim that as being lesser, which I think is something that has fueled a lot of these so-called witch wars. But it is a serious, like, difference in life experience, if nothing else. The experience of, like, oh, I met a group of people and then they invited me in and we went through these mystery rituals together. That's just a very different way of coming into a religion than, you know, I had some ideas and this book seemed to fit with my ideas, and so I kept working at it from that. Like, both totally valid in my opinion, but very different ways of coming into the practice. And I think that divide. The other thing I would say, and this goes into this as well, is we're constantly. This is a bad habit I think that we've had since the very beginning of the Wiccan movement. Is we're constantly looking for more authenticity. We're looking for, like, a way to, like, trace it back, because it's really hard to accept that old Gerald, you know, at least the Gardnerian path that most Wiccas are heavily indebted to. Like, it's a new thing. It's a thing that was made up in the 20th century. I think that that's perfect. You know, that's cool. There's nothing. I don't think that makes it that there's anything wrong with that. But so you have constantly, like, I think that this is one of the big things in the growth of the exclusivity of the British traditional witchcraft kind of movements, is like, oh, well, we can trace our way back to the source, whereas y'all can't. I think this is also, although it's very cool, I think that this is also part of why people are more and more interested in rejecting Wicca as a system and going into more folk magic, like lowercase witch kind of things. Is again like, oh, well, maybe Wicca isn't real, but this stuff is old. This stuff goes back. And I think that as long as I think that this is also the thing in the growth of some of the other opposing pagan traditions, like hard polytheism in heathenry, is again looking for this is the real stuff. We found the real stuff.
It's not in the lore.
It's not in the lore. Why are you doing this? It's not in the lore. And I think that as long as a movement we are so hung up on this idea that, like, that our lived practices, the things that we're doing and that we've been doing for close to a century now, even if you're just starting at Gardner, the idea that stuff isn't valid in and of itself, and that we're always having to find some way to make ourselves feel more like a real religion. I think we're going to continue having those kinds of splits and fractures as whatever was accepted as good enough by the last generation. Now the new generation sees the cracks in it and wants to develop some new authenticating mechanism.
So it's like we're trying to define our religion by what religion has we see what we came from.
Yeah.
By the Christian definition of religion, it's not nearly the same. It's
And that stuff is
entirely
blowing up the world. That
Yes.
stuff
Yeah.
is blowing up the
Yeah.
world. We
And
shouldn't
we have
reject
to-
it.
Like, well, it's like we have to accept a new definition of what religion is, or maybe just the word accept spirituality we do it. And calling it a religion and judging it by the rules of Abrahamic religions is not really important because it doesn't work because we don't work the same way at all.
I was speaking at a private school and talking about the modern movement and whatever, and there were some African students there. They came up afterwards and they said, "Oh, so you're an animist?" And I went, yeah. So we put whatever stories and lore and whatever on top of it. But basically, for me, I'm an animist, and that works okay. Also, we love to name things. You know, I got to have my new name. This is my new shiny name for what it is. Sometimes you can just practice it and you love it and get good at it, and that's a good thing. Anybody else?